So good morning, everybody. So homework. I'm a former primary school teacher myself, and I used to teach junior infants for a long time. And I remember in my own school always fighting to say, "Don't be giving them homework now in junior infants. That's the poor children. They're 4, they're 5. They should be at home playing with one another." So I suppose one of the things in research is you should identify your own bias. So I've just put my bias out there now. So I had to, and when you identify your own bias, then you can go and do the research, because the research might be telling you about something completely different than your own bias. So anyway, so I started with that, with my own bias. Anyway, so what I'm going to share with you is talking about what the literature says about homework, and then some diverse opinions from parents, children and teachers about homework, because that was really, for every person that I met, there was a different opinion. So it was very hard to kind of pull it all together and see where could we go, from here, from where we are. And then looking at some homework approaches that were in the schools that we did the research in, because as Leah said, we used schools that already had, in many ways had many positive relationships with parents and had already done considerable work in terms of trying to improve the way homework was done. And then I'll also share with you some of the findings and recommendations. So first of all, just to look at, there's our first report that Leah pointed out. I think it's about 150, 200 pages long, the first report. And so I'm only going to give you 2 slides on some of the things that the literature says about homework. And I suppose I picked out the things that were kind of also stuff that we found when we did our research. So the first one would be that what we really found, what the literature is saying. So the literature would have come, actually there's a lot of literature in America about homework, and not that much, would you believe, in England, and less again in Ireland. But what they say is that a very effective homework strategy amongst children who might be struggling in school was when they were given real life assignments for homework. So stuff like, those of you who are parents or have children in school at the moment, you might be aware of, when children come home and say, I have to go and interview Nana about when she was in school. Something like that. Or a child who brings home a teddy bear and says, the teddy bear is with us for the weekend, and whatever we do, Teddy has to do it as well. And then I have to go into school on Monday and tell everybody about, where Teddy was. And that's a fierce pressure on parents as well, who just wanted to sit in front of the TV for the weekend. But anyway, so, oh God, we have the teddy, come on. So anyway, doing stuff that is really related to real life is very important. Also, homework that coincides with children's own interests is very important. So I suppose a project-based homework is really popular for that reason, that children can say, a child who's obsessed with World War II, or a child who's obsessed with cars and how they work, that they can go off and do a project on that and bring loads of different parts of the curriculum in on that. That seems to work very well if it coincides with the child's own interests. One school actually used to have a PE homework one day a week, and of course children who I know there are children who don't necessarily like PE, but it was great for children who are into sport and who like being out and about in the environment. Also, interactive assignments are more suited to children than repetitive tasks. Now, I suppose there is something to be said about repetitive tasks as well, because I would say a lot of teachers would see that, homework is used as a reinforcement for what happens in school in a way, and repetition is used a lot. As a former junior infant teacher, I started most days when we were singing all the nursery rhymes every morning and chatting about what happened at home, and so reinforcement and repetition is very important. But what the research is saying is that interactive stuff. So like that stuff where, you're talking to ma'am about something, or you have to find out, how many forks are in your cutlery drawer, or you have to find out something where it means talking to somebody else. Also that students, that they are very well able to self-monitor with homework, that when they're taught that, they have to be taught that though, of course, and they have to be taught that in school, but that, in other words, when students feel or children feel in charge, if you like, of the way they're doing their homework, they feel more empowered. And so self-monitoring, so in other words, that if they get a little piece of work to do, that they have a checklist. Oh, did I make sure I have a title? Did I make sure that there's full stops at the end of all my sentences? Did I make sure that there's paragraphs? So self-checking, so that they bring their homework in then and they say to teacher, yeah, and I've checked, I've edited quite well, teacher, you've nothing to worry about there. So that kind of self-monitoring. And also there's kind of contested views in the literature about what they call individualised homework. Now, so what I mean by that is that, different children would get different homework depending on what their needs are. And some people say, particularly for children who have got additional needs, that's very important. And it was done in at least one, if not 2 of the schools that we researched. But there's also research there that says actually what it does is it puts a huge burden on schools, and then schools spend an inordinate amount of time trying to correct all the individualised homework. So there's that little bit of debate there, if you like. The other thing that the literature says is that dialogue between parents, I mean, sometimes literature says the obvious. We all know if parents and teachers are talking to one another that that's really good, and you usually work things out. So what it says is that dialogue between parents and teachers about homework would give clarity to expectations about homework, and it might lead to a shared vision about the purpose of homework. And also that, the provision of things like training workshops, maybe at the beginning of the year, that teachers would invite parents in and say, look, this is what we were planning for homework. Now, it might be even better if they said, how would you like, what would you like? and that parents would also be involved in maybe helping to shape the school's homework policy. But at the very least to have, some sort of collaboration at the beginning of the year and maybe again halfway through the year to talk about, look, how to do the homework even. We have that, that traditional example we always use about subtraction. Is it take away, do you borrow and pay back, or do you regroup? And I think that has bothered every single one of us at some stage in our lives. So parent-teacher collaboration is very important. That's what the literature says. Okay, so there are, as I said to you, there is diversity of views about and approaches to homework as well. And what we discovered was, I actually have a picture of my nephew called Matthew here. And it's just because there's a phenomenon called the Matthew effect that you might already have heard about. So I was just reminding myself there with my little nephew. So the Matthew effect, what it is basically that, I've heard it used a lot in literacy, that children who are good readers will read more and more because they're really excited about reading, they're really good at reading, and they're getting a great buzz from it. But a child who struggles with reading will find it really challenging, and it'll actually turn them off reading, and then they read less and less. So those who are good at reading get better because they engage more, and those who are bad at reading already have negative attitudes about it, so they kind of avoid it, and then they get worse and worse and worse. And homework is exactly the same as that. Children who are already doing well in school, they go home, they do the homework in 10 minutes, and there's no bother. But other children who, for whatever reason, might have difficulties in school, it's like a double punishment. They're struggling in school, and then they go home and they're punished further with stuff that they can't do. I remember somebody saying to me, we were talking about dyslexia one time, and somebody was talking about a phonological approach to, helping children with dyslexia. And one of my colleagues said, but imagine if you're bad at phonological awareness, why would you keep hammering it? Why would you keep, if somebody doesn't really get sounds and rhyming, why would you keep teaching it over and over again? Would it not be better to kind of look at a more visual approach, because that might help the child with dyslexia? So, we really have to consider that thing about, homework for children who are already struggling. How does that help? And actually, I have a quote here now. I better get the glasses on for this one. That comes from our executive summary, where it says, if one of the key functions of homework is to involve parents in their children's learning, the fact that homework feels mostly stressful to parents does not warrant positive involvement in learning, and may therefore not function as the best tool for parental involvement in children's education. So if we're using homework as a way to communicate with parents, and parents hate homework or they're stressed by it, it doesn't really set us up, between teachers and parents. It doesn't set up a good foundation, if you like, or a good basis for good relationships. So what I'm going to do now is talk to you a little about some innovative approaches that we saw. I've already mentioned the bringing home the teddy bear. I think, do you remember that French film, Amélie? Didn't she do it? Or the leprechaun that got, somebody went on holidays and brought a leprechaun and sent home pictures. And anyway, so that's the teddy bear one. That's one of the innovative approaches to the case study schools. So one thing that was done in one school was Mindfulness Mondays. And this, you probably notice, is kind of coming a little bit more and more into schools where, a lot of schools practice yoga with children, which I think is a great development. Mind you, I suppose schools they end up kind of being trialled. Every single approach that's out there, schools get, they get dumped with a lot of initiatives. But anyway, some of them are better than others. And in Mindfulness Mondays was where the children would go home and practice mindfulness, having been taught that, and parents having had workshops on it as well. And then the other one was project-based homework, again, where children would, go home and have a pet project, or that something was happening in school and the children were sent home to kind of find out about stuff. And you see, that actually, some parents love that kind of homework as well, but actually children who do a lot of project homework, they end up asking, can I get on the internet? Can I do this? Can I do that? And ma'am, what does this mean? Dad, what does that mean? Or whoever's at home. So project-based homework actually puts more pressure on parents as well. Now, a lot of parents would welcome that, but because most parents, if they see their kids are happy and engaged, they'll go along with it. But sometimes parents are home from work at 6:30 in the evening. By the time the dinner is ready, the children are washed, the lunches are made for the morning, and then they're in bed. It's quite frenetic in the evenings. But anyway, I mean, the literature does say, and children generally are happy with project-based homework. Another thing that parents really, or schools were doing, the schools where we did the research, some of them were doing was they were setting homework at the beginning of the week. So parents then, on a Monday evening, they were able to see this is what needs to be done for the week, and they could plan their week in a way with the child, of course, around, if they know I've hurling training on Wednesday, so I'm not doing my maths that night, I'm going to do it on Thursday night, or I'm going to do it on Tuesday night. And actually what that was doing as well is it was developing children's organisational skills, that they had to do a plan and say, I know I'm going to see Nana on Wednesday, or I'm going to the hurling training, or whatever it is, and I'm going to decide when the homework gets done, and then the homework was handed in on Friday. So that seemed to be a very positive thing with parents. Physical homework, as I said, during Active Schools programme, that happened, and there was another school as well that had regular PE homework, as they said. The teddy bear homework, I won't go into again. This is the idea of bringing home the teddy bear and the teddy bear experiencing the family life, and then the child going in and talking about it. A reading for pleasure programme as well, and there are lots of those kind of programmes out there, where a child would bring home a book of his or her choice, and somebody at home would read the story to them, or they might read it themselves, depending on the age of the child. And then differentiated homework seemed to work very, very well in one particular, I think it was one of the Desh Band 1 schools, where, it was very clear that, children were struggling and they were given less homework than others. And however it was managed, it didn't seem to have a stigma attached to it, because the way children are, they often begin to notice, oh, Mandy only has that, but I have more, So there's a lot of that goes on as well. But anyway, it seemed to manage, in the junior school, it seemed to work very well. Okay, so the other thing that in School 1, we in our report, we just named them Schools 1 to 5. And just one other thing I wanted to tell you about the 5 schools, actually, when we got to the language seminar as part of the project, we also we had a pilot school where we tried out the language workshops, learned a lot from that, and then included their data in our research project as well, and it was very, very rich. So in School 1, there was an information evening held and a workshop for parents of infants, where they could find out what was really, so the homework vision, if you like, was shared. And parents were very happy with that, but what they actually said was they'd like more of that, not just one a year. Anyway, just an interesting one to share, because you might think, principals are formidable people who, I don't know what you think of principals, but anyway, 2 principals out of the 5 actually were against all homework, full stop. They just thought it was an absolute scourge, for children, for parents, and were against it. And that the funny thing was, sometimes principals and the teachers in their own schools were at odds when it came to homework. And they had and so most schools now have a homework policy. But the funny thing was that a lot of teachers were ignoring the school policy on homework. So the the principal was able to say, yes, we have a school policy. It's only 10 minutes work in senior infants. It's 15 in first class. It's whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of teachers were kind of doing solo runs. And then you had situations in schools where they'd say, oh, the 6th class teacher, she like my child is out doing homework for an hour and 10 minutes every night. So there seemed to be, one of the things that we were really finding was that there needs to be, that whole school approach to homework needs to be revisited, and that teachers need to come on board and agree on what what the school policy is, and to follow that school policy. One principal said to me, I said, I'm really looking forward to sharing the report with you. And she said, don't come back to me unless it says ban homework. So that'll tell you now, that'll tell you how strongly they felt. So I haven't been back to her. So anyway, So the language workshop. So this was part 3 of the project. Remember, Leah told you part 1 was we wrote an extensive literature review on the whys and wherefores about the home learning environment and parental involvement in their children's education and homework too. And then the second part was when we went out to the 5 schools and did the case studies and interviewed children and interviewed parents and interviewed teachers. And then part 3 was going back to those schools with the addition of a pilot school to try out the workshop, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, to do this language workshop whereby we were going to sort of trial a new type of homework, if you like. And the idea was that that homework would support the aims and the learning outcomes of the new primary language curriculum. So I'll tell you first about the one thing that happened in the pilot. When we went to the pilot workshop, the pilot school, and told them about everything that actually I'll tell you about this first, and then I'll tell you about the reaction. So the aims of the workshop were that we wanted to identify in each school what kind of homework do children currently do. And then what we wanted to do was introduce and discuss some enjoyable ideas for homework to improve children's oral language development in line with the learning outcomes of the new primary language curriculum. So the new primary language curriculum came out in 2015, and it's a primary language curriculum for English but also for Irish. And then we asked parents to plan 2 of these enjoyable ideas that myself and my colleagues shared with parents, that they would do two things per night with their children, and that traditional homework would be abandoned, and it was going to be a 2-week trial, if you like. So that's what we invited them to do, to abandon traditional homework for 2 weeks and just do the stuff that we were introducing to them, and not to spend more than 20 minutes a night at it. Okay, so how did that go? So I suppose one thing, part of our remit in the tender as well, was that we should tell parents a little bit more about the primary language curriculum, so that they were more au fait with, what teachers have to do in school, and for very good reason. The primary language curriculum is a great document. But one of the things that the primary language curriculum says is that every aim that it has, or every learning outcome that it has, is prefaced with this phrase: through appropriately playful learning experiences, children should be able to, and then, the aim goes on. So they should be able to comprehend a reading passage of whatever, in 4th class, or they should be able to engage in conversation and make appropriate eye contact, or whatever. But this thing of appropriately playful learning experiences is new, and it's wonderful, because it's really a sort of, I suppose, putting it there in an official document that children really should learn through play, So anyway, so what we did was introduced a few playful ideas to parents and to children, and they were going to do 2 of those a night for 2 weeks, and then they were going to come back and talk to us about how they got on. So the things that we practiced with the parents, or we introduced to parents, was we talked about dialogic story reading, which was, I suppose, is the topic of my own doctoral research. Basically, it's just a form of reading stories to children, but it's more interactive than kind of turning the page and, reading fast. It's kind of like chatting about the story, wondering what's going to happen next with your child, speculating about characters and what they might do, wondering what you might do if you were in those character situations. So in a way, using the story to relate to the child's life and kind of putting the child in the story. So we talked to parents about that, about a dialogic approach to reading stories. And then we had a couple of other kind of oral language activities, one being where we kind of gave a microphone, where you bring home a microphone, or a toy microphone, and the child practices something like maybe telling a joke, watching the weather forecast with their parents, and then practicing what they're going to say about the weather forecast when they come into school the next day, or even talking about something that happened at home, or doing a book review or a TV program review. So that was another one. And then we had several. We had the other traditional ones we talked about, like the teddy bear. We had the ones where you go and visit a next door neighbour or a granny or an aunt, and ask them about something, sort of exciting in their lives, or something about their job or something like that. So we used interviews as well. We also used a suite of activities that were given to us by NALA. I think it's called, is it Help My People Learn? Is it? Help My Kid Learn. If you have a look at that website, it's absolutely fabulous. So we had hundreds of these little booklets with oral language games in them, and we gave them out to all parents as well so that they could practice those activities with their kids. And what we said was, just do those two things, read a story and play a game every night for 2 nights. Now, what happened was, I mean, the parents who came on board, they were absolutely wonderful, but they nearly killed themselves over the 2 weeks. When they came back, they said, well, we spent an hour and a half at it most nights, and what ended up, they ended up having great fun and really enjoying it with their children. The children absolutely loved the alternative homework, but the parents were exhausted by the end of the 2 weeks. So they were more or less saying, yeah, like it was great, but like it's great now just to get back to the spellings and the sentences, Because, and it really was because they completely overdid it in the trial, if you like. Anyway, so it was interesting that they embraced it with such joy. And if you look at the full report, there's loads and loads of references to people laughing and enjoying and engaging with their children and finding out things about their kids that they didn't know, and really just getting great pleasure from it. But it was an absolute time, it just soaked up so much time that they couldn't see it as something that they would be able to do in the long term. And of course, the research team that's not the plan, you know what I mean, that you would spend an hour and a half every night playing those games. It would, anyway. So after the workshops, what did we find? First of all, that children almost universally enjoyed additional time spent with their parents. Oh, sorry, I must go back to the little hiccup that happened in the pilot workshop. Basically, when we did the pilot workshop, we said, we're going to give you alternative homework, and we want you to abandon what the school does normally, and we're going to give you this alternative homework. And I'm not sure if it was the term homework that caused the problem, but what happened was parents kind of felt burdened by, oh God, it's just another form of homework. So now I have to go home and I have to read a story and I have to do this, I have to do that. And when they came back, they kind of said, yeah, look, but it was homework in the end of the day. And, it took up more time than the traditional homework. And, they sort of said, yes, we did have fun, but really it was an extra stress on us. And when we really interrogated, what we discovered was that we attached the term homework to it, and that the word itself is so loaded. It's associated with stress, it's associated with burden. So what we did then after the pilot workshop was we just abandoned the term. So we agreed as a research team, when we would go to all the other schools, that we were going to say, there's no homework. Now, I suppose it's a bit of a swizz if you think about it. But it kind of worked. So we went to all the other schools and we said, there's no homework for the next 2 weeks. We just want you to play a game and read a story with your children. And everything worked really well. So it just goes to show, really, like the term homework is just like, really, everybody just hates the term homework, don't they? But anyway, so that's what we found. Children enjoyed additional time. Now, really, children just loved it, and they enjoyed the additional time spent with their parents as well. And they enjoy the interactive aspect of the homework, and particularly the oral language games. Those NALA Help My Kid Learn little concertina. They're like little concertinas. You open it up like, the old atlases you used to buy, or if you were buying a map of France and it opens up and you can never fold it back together again. It's like one of those. And so they're fabulous and they're free. And anyway, so well done, NALA, and Help My Kid Learn. Very good oral language games there. Parents invested time and energy into the 2-week alternative to homework period, and they enjoyed the time, but they did not think that this alternative homework was sustainable. Okay, so a few other findings, as I said. Now, and this absolutely did happen. It was very interesting. So parents, many parents were screaming for change in relation to homework, but there were other parents who were saying, oh no, if you get rid of that, then will they fall behind? And like we got a lot of questions about, well, if we're doing this for the 2 weeks, what about the maths? And will the teacher do extra maths in school now because, they won't be doing their maths so we had to reassure them with the teachers that, that the children would not lose out because they didn't have their maths or they didn't have their spellings for these 2 weeks. So some parents embraced the alternative homework, others worried about children falling behind in other areas. Now remember, it was only for 2 weeks. Some parents felt the alternative homework could be practiced once a term to give children a break from routine homework. So a lot of parents kind of said, no, we're happy enough with the way things are, but sure, look, we had great fun, and sure, bring it in once a term and it'd be a break, and and the kids really did learn a lot from it. So what we really discovered was that even though some parents were looking for change, other parents found change problematic. Look, we all know that from where we work, where in our own daily lives, change is always problematic, isn't it? Like if you have to go to work a different way, you might get lost sometimes. We're so kind of caught up in our routines or whatever. So change is often problematic in organisations, but equally the idea of change in relation to homework was problematic for a lot of parents. Most children and many parents liked the interactive homework, like the games and the interviews, I said that. They liked the project homework, and they liked homework that coincided with interests such as their PE homework. Families loved the idea of weekly homework where children could choose when to do it. They liked a differentiated approach to homework, particularly the families that were getting the differentiated approach to homework. And also what happened in some schools was, instead of having Irish, English, sums and spellings every night, there was just one topic a night, and that seemed to go down very well. So like that one night you just do your English reading, and then the second night you just do something in Irish. So spread it out over a topic a night instead of lots every night. So what also came up was the importance of choice. You know, if you look at any literature really about learning nowadays, you see that the more choice we give to children, the more empowered they feel and the more motivated they feel to learn as well. So that old way that many of us might have learned, where filling the pail with information, you know, the teacher talking and the children learning, it just doesn't cut it anymore. You know, that it needs to be interactive. The teacher needs to be more of a facilitator than a kind of a transmitter of information. And they need to give children choices. 10 minutes, thank you. So choice is crucially important to children's experience of homework. Children need to feel in control and in order to feel motivated. And having a choice in relation to when, where, how and what of homework really does facilitate that. So choice. Even if schools took that on board, that would be great. However, we did find in the research as well that children were not really consulted about homework. So, I mean, I suppose you could say, you know, ask any child, do you like homework? No. You know, do you want to do homework? No. But actually, you know, so you might think that that is the response. Actually, junior infants absolutely love homework. But I think it's because they don't get any, you know. And they also, because they see it as it's what their big brother or their big sister does. So I'm sure those of you who have small kids, you might see the junior infant come and saying, I'm just doing my homework here now, you know. And they mightn't have any homework at all. But anyway, so I suppose what I'm saying is that children don't necessarily all hate homework. We discovered that as well, you know. And some kids lamented, you know, when we interviewed them about how did you get on for the 2 weeks, they absolutely loved what they did. But there wasn't just one or two. Several children said, but I really like doing sums as well because I'm really good at them, you know. And you know, so it's just funny. They were contested even amongst the children. But what we also discovered was that in general, schools didn't talk to kids about homework and what they wanted, except in one school where it was one of the principals who said, I'd love to get rid of homework altogether, used to allow children to apply to him at the beginning of the year to get a pass out of homework. And he granted passes to children, you know. Now, I'm sure there was conversations with parents as well, but you could actually write to the principal and get a pass out of homework and then not have to do. I'm not sure whether it was for the month or I think it was for the year, but I'm not. I'd have to go back into the document and look. So in this school, children could apply to opt out of homework. And also in that school, they had done surveys with the kids on homework. What did they like? What did they not like? And they were beginning to implement changes based on the findings of that survey. So, as I said, some of these schools were very innovative and proactive in terms of the way they worked around homework. Okay, so the homework recommendations. So what I have now is, I hope I won't bore you, but I have a whole list of recommendations for homework, and then I'm going into the overall recommendations from the study. Is that all right? Are you still with me? Yeah. Okay, all right. So the homework recommendations were, you know the book, We Need to Talk About Kevin. Well, parents and teachers need to talk about homework, you know. So that was the first finding. We need to talk more. Parents and teachers need to talk more about homework, and some training workshops would be useful. There's also, what we discovered was, there is a need for national guidance on homework in relation to time, in relation to content, and in relation to method that suits children best. And I do know when we were talking to teachers, a lot of teachers said, oh, we love the games as well. Like, so when you did that trial homework, we actually helped teachers a lot as well. And teachers were saying things to us like, could you just put all those games into a kind of a brochure and kind of, and put it in under Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we'll give out, we will do that kind of homework. We'll incorporate it into what we're doing. So, but as I said as well, there was also teachers not kind of conforming, or whatever, conforming is not a good word, but not adhering to the agreed whole school approach to homework as well. So, there was, you said that there needs to be more of a kind of maybe a bit of national guidance in terms of, what is good homework and what should it look like and how should it be administered and all of that. And as I said, third one I've just kind of said to you, a whole school approach should be applied in relation to homework. And then entertaining and interactive oral language games and activities could be incorporated into children's homework. Not added in on top of all the other stuff they already have to do, but maybe looking at, having it there as, a different approach to homework. Now, the other thing we looked at was, this thing what we call colonisation of children's lives, that in planning children's homework, schools need to take into consideration that children have other things to do as well when they go home in the evenings. Now, this happened very much, I suppose, in the more affluent areas as well, where children were on unbelievably hard schedules of like ballet on a Monday, GAA on a Tuesday, athletics club on a Wednesday, So, I mean, that brings its own difficulties. But some of those, the parents who were very busy bringing their children to these activities, they kind of saw it like that. It was a colonisation, that it was, hard enough like to work away in school, but then coming home and interfering with our lives at home. There was a very strong sense of that. So I suppose that we need to think about that, about, colonising children's lives. Another recommendation 6, I think there's 8 homework ones. Schools might consider removing homework from junior infant classes, and I've already told you my bias at the beginning. I didn't make it up, it came from the research, that's what research is about. Maybe with the exception of story time. What I mean by story time is, parents reading to their children or reading with their children. And indeed, there are children in junior infants who are already readers, and they are just voracious when it comes to, I want this book, get me another book or whatever. So I'm not saying like stop children from learning if they want to learn, but just that, sometimes, when you see 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds struggling with phonics because they're just not ready for it, and struggling with the words in the margarine boxes and things like that. It's all right for the children who are able, for the children who are not able, and they're very young. That can cause a huge amount of stress and turn them off reading for life. That's what really would bother you. Number 7, colleges of education. This is where we have to look at ourselves. So I'm in Marino Institute of Education. It's an associated college of Trinity College Dublin, and we educate young teachers. So this is a recommendation for us, that we should consider a module on parental involvement in their children's education, and that we should include a focus on homework in the module. Because a lot of what happens to student teachers when they graduate, they might be told stuff in college, but then they go into schools and immediately they become encultured in the school. And a lot of what they learned in college kind of gets thrown out the window. So, but I mean, that's not to say that we shouldn't focus on it in school. And actually, we talk to students in college about that thing of not, becoming encultured maybe anyway, that's another thing. So anyway, schools need to consider the multiple demands on parents' time in reflecting on how best to provide support to parents. So Leah alluded to that earlier. You have, parents who might have children with additional needs. You might have parents who are working full-time themselves. You might have parents who are experiencing stress in their lives like poverty or bereavement or something like that. So, there are multiple demands on parents' times, and, schools need to not just communicate all in the same way. There might be somebody who needs a text sent to them. There might be somebody else who works by email. There might be somebody else who might even need a telephone call, So anyway, that's another recommendation. So now, they're the homework recommendations, and now I'm just going to very quickly, have I gotten about 3 minutes, have I? No?
You have got about 5.
5, all right, okay. So there are 8 recommendations, and so what are the differences between the recommendations I've just mentioned to you are homework, and these are the overall study recommendations. So the first one is that we really need to look at relationships, and Leah mentioned that when she was speaking, that the foundation of everything is really predicated on relationships between parents and teachers and parents and the principal, and that schools really need to look around and look at the subtle messages that they're giving parents. Is there a sign saying "Do not come beyond this point"? Like that can be very and there might be a good reason for that, but it's not probably the best way to proceed, really. And also that boundary setting, because there was a lot of stuff on boundaries in there, from parents' points of view and from teachers' points of view. And that boundary setting should really focus on the creation of safe, welcoming spaces for all stakeholders. In other words, whatever boundaries you agree on are good for parents and they're good for teachers. They're not about keeping one group in their place. So that was the first recommendation. The second recommendation was about that parents are a diverse group, and that schools need to identify multiple approaches in how they work with parents. So I've kind of mentioned that one already. The third recommendation is about parents who have children who need additional support, and that came across so strongly in a number of schools where they just like parents really do need more support from for children with special educational needs. Life is hard enough, but if you throw in extra needs, that the school needs to recognise that and to try and facilitate a kind of a child-centred approach to meeting those needs. The next one, recommendation 4, is supporting parents' self-efficacy beliefs. I think Leah again alluded to this earlier, where she said that sets of parents, advantaged and less advantaged, were actually doing more or less the same, very similar things with their kids, but the less advantaged parents thought, oh, that's just what you do, it's not really education, whereas the more, advantaged parents were very clear that this was education. So that you need to help parents to realise that what they're doing is really supportive of schools, that what they're doing already is very, very good. Okay, recommendation 5. Schools should avoid monocultural approaches such as asking parents to speak English at home. Those of you who are aware of research on literature on bilingualism know that it is not the case that if you come from another tradition and you speak, say French or whatever at home, that you should stop doing that and just speak English to your child, because the research shows that children learn best when they're really proficient in their home language first. But also that we shouldn't be imposing, our cultural norms, or whatever, the school's cultural norms on families, and that schools should be very welcoming of other cultures and have signs up and all of that around the place. I actually think that schools have embraced that very well, but that's just my own observation. Okay, recommendation 6, the crucial role of the school principal. Again, this comes out in nearly every piece of research that was the last slide now. This comes up in nearly every piece of research that's done around education, how important the school principal is in terms of guiding teachers, in terms of having conversations about maybe deficit thinking in their own schools. So if you have a teacher who thinks, oh, those parents don't care about their children, that the principal actually has a job in talking about deficit thinking and saying, hold on a second now, there is no person in the whole world who doesn't care about their child, So that the principal has a big job in terms of, supporting his or her teachers in the school, and also monitoring things like signage and making sure that he or she has a very welcoming and approachable manner with parents. Number 7, structural and logistical features that invite or discourage parental involvement. In a way, that's probably, I've kind of incorporated that into recommendation 6, if you like, that you should look at the school and see, are there structural impediments there to parental involvement? So things like parents' rooms, which are part of, in the Deshband 1 schools, they seem to work very well. Now, there were parents who were afraid to come into the parents' rooms as well, so there are issues around that. But, to look at schools and see, are they a good fit for making parents feel welcome in terms of their structures? And then finally, a recommendation that times of transition are a good time to establish positive relationships with families. And this is a kind of an important recommendation, because you're probably aware that we're now at a stage where we're looking at what's happening in the early years settings and what's happening in the junior infant classroom, and how ASHTR can kind of influence maybe what's going on in the infant classroom, and how there's a more kind of cohesive approach between the early years settings and schools. So that is a time when early years settings and schools can kind of communicate with parents and develop positive relationships there. So that's it. That's us really in a nutshell trying to get 450 pages of a report into a chat with you on a Saturday, on a cloudy Saturday morning. So thank you very much for your attention.